It's our pleasure to welcome now Jansen Owen. He serves in the Mississippi House of Representatives, represents District 106, which includes Lamar and Pearl River counties. He also serves on the committees. Tell us about the committees. Welcome, first of all, Representative Owen, but we don't have your committee listing. I always like to get that out there. What committees are you serving on?
Thank you for having me. I'm Vice Chair of Judiciary B, but also serve on State Affairs, Business and Commerce, Agriculture, and I recently just got off of Transportation.
Okay. All right. So you're busy with all those committees. Now, I just got the notification. Looks like you guys, you gavelled in, then you recessed, subject to recall, then you went back in. Is that right? Did I see that right?
Yep. We just got back on the floor. I'm here in the cloakroom off to the side, zooming in.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. So, tell us about this legislation that you have introduced, and it actually passed the House, I believe, and that is to provide some degree of school choice. We would describe it as open enrollment, public-to-public transfer. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we call it several things: open enrollment, portability, and of course choice. The ultimate goal is to bring more of the choice aspect to parents in Mississippi when it comes to educating their children. Under current law, if a parent wants to take their child to another public school, that public school, of course, has to accept them. But the wonky thing about our law is that the sending district, the district losing that student, has the ability to veto that parent's decision and say, no, we're holding that kid here. You're staying here. So what this bill does, it does away with that veto power for the sending school district. If the parent wants to leave a school district, that school district can't keep that child there against the parent's wishes. Now, of course, the receiving district gets a lot of leeway in whether or not they want to accept those students. They get to look at capacity, and they get to set their own ground rules as long as they publish them and make sure they're transparent. So we give a lot of flexibility to that receiving district, but this bill really targets those districts that are holding children back and vetoing a parent's decision to send a child to a new school.
And this would not require that the student's home district, the school to which they are assigned based on their address, has a certain grade. Like they don't necessarily have to attend a school that's a D or F district. I believe that's what the Senate was thinking about looking at. I know in my conversations with the lieutenant governor and when we interviewed him, he seemed to be open to that idea. Your bill actually would allow open enrollment regardless, right?
That's right. It's regardless. There are no grades or minimum grading requirements or anything. A parent gets to choose to do it. And people, talk about, why aren't you just limiting it to D and F districts? Well, if you really look at, why we're doing this, to bring more choice to parent, like make sure parents are able to dictate more about their children's education. Parents get to consider more than just the grade of a school when they decide where to educate their children. There could be a school that's smaller, and maybe their child would benefit from a smaller classroom, or maybe it's more convenient for the parent to take the child to school every morning because the other district is on the way to that parent's work. So I don't think that we should limit a parent's choice just to the single consideration of whether or not that school is a D or F school, because parents get to take into account all kinds of factors when making decisions about their children.
Yeah. Okay, so explain the capacity aspect. You mentioned that earlier, and I've read the legislation, and I'll pass on to you that that's the issue that gets the most attention with respect to the receiving school having some sort of discretion and latitude over applicants that they would accept for enrollment. How do we calculate capacity, for example? Is that described in the legislation? How does that work?
No, we leave that really open to the district to be able to report and determine what their capacity is. So we're trying to give as much discretion to these receiving districts, because that was a big issue last year, was that we were going to be filling up classrooms that are already full. So we're letting the districts make that determination, but of course they have to report their number, but also how they got to the number. They got to report that, and it's got to be published twice a year under my current legislation. I initially wanted 4. but we made some concessions and brought it down to 2. So the hope is that these receiving districts will be really fair in their assessment and determination as to whether or not they're at capacity. And hopefully we don't have to come back in and make any changes ourselves.
Okay, so how then, Representative Owen, how do we prevent the schools from sort of manipulating those figures because they really don't want any transfers?
Well, that is, of course, a concern of mine as well. But again, I'm trying to give the district some leeway, which is why I'm requiring the reporting requirements and the detailed reporting requirements so that we can monitor and see if that's something that's happening. So I believe I said on the floor, we're giving it to the districts and letting them decide. They have to report it, and hopefully they do the right thing. And if not, then we'll have to come back next year and reel that in a little bit. But I think I can trust my districts right now. If this goes into law, I think they'll be fair. And eventually, I think some of them may be even incentivized to have some open room, because what people forget about is with these children comes money.
Right.
And ultimately, at some point, a school may realize, okay, if we take in 10 more transfer kids, that's a good chunk of change we could take in with them as well, because they'll be getting the state portion, which is about $600 to $800. But under our legislation, we also have a fund we're establishing to cover the local ad valorem rate that school district would be missing out from the parents coming into the district.
And I believe the legislation sets that at $5 million. Is that right?
That is our cap in it, yes, sir.
And so how would a school go about accessing those funds?
So it would actually be the parent would apply. The parent would apply to the fund through MDE, and then it would calculate. MDE is able to calculate how much it costs in every district to educate a child. So they'll take that total cost and subtract the state portion from it, and that'll be the amount they get from the fund.
Okay, so it's automatic. I thought perhaps that the school district itself, if they approved a transfer, would have to then, to access the local portion, would have to apply for it, or it would be done through a grant or something like that. So it's automatic then?
It's supposed to follow the child, yes, sir.
Okay, so...
And even in mid-year transfers, there was another concern that, like, okay, if a child transfers in November, the school's missing out in that whole year's worth of funding for that child, but we break it up into monthly installments. So schools actually don't get their $600 to $800 for each student at the beginning of the year. They get it on a monthly basis. So what we do is we just prorate it and send it to the school for the rest of the year.
And I'm digging into this local portion because you know that's an objection you frequently hear, that when a student transfers from one district to another, sure, you guys at the state can make sure the money follows them to the receiving school, but at that point the receiving school is not getting the local portion because the student does not reside in that district. Therefore, they're not paying taxes, the local taxes to fund their education in that district. And so you put a separate fund. Bottom line is the state's covering that on behalf of the receiving school. But the transferring school, the home schools, still keeping the local portion, even though they're losing the student, right?
They're keeping the local portion. For a student they're not educating. They do lose that state portion, but they are keeping that local portion. But a big complaint we hear too is, what are you going to do when all these schools, some of these schools lose all of their students? And I believe I said on the floor, look, if a school has actually lost all of its students, it's probably not very good of a school, and it probably should lose all of its students. Which is kind of the point of this legislation, is to kind of bring the market aspects into public education. If a school's losing a bunch of kids, what are they doing wrong? Maybe the goal is for them to kind of improve on themselves based off of the idea that, okay, if we don't do well, then we're going to lose our kids and we're going to lose our money.
Well, you would expect the natural reaction to be, and this is one of the goals, is that when schools know this is a possibility, that they could lose students and the funding associated with the student from the state, maybe that motivates them a little bit to improve the quality of their output so that nobody wants to leave.
Exactly. What are they doing that makes parents want to leave your district, and maybe they can fix it for themselves?
Yeah.
So.
Can you hang around for another segment? We got some other topics we can get to. How you doing? You got to get to the floor.
I'm good. I think Representative Scott is doing an amendment, so I should have time.
Okay, we got Representative Jansen Owen on the line with us. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. We've got Representative Jansen Owen on the line. We've just been talking about this legislation that survived its test in the House and is over there in the Senate. I believe it's been referred to the Senate Education Committee, chaired by Senator Dennis DeBar. Honestly, Representative Owen, I don't feel like the senator is a big fan of any form of school choice, including open enrollment, public to public.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get that vibe too, but of course we work well with our Senate colleagues, and I know that over the coming weeks, I have great confidence that he might see some light and
Okay.
get this bill out of his committee. I know Delbert, the lieutenant governor, has voiced at least some support for some form of portability or open enrollment in the past few weeks and just immediately before session. So I'm encouraged by some of that, and I'm encouraged by some of other conversations I've had that it's got a chance to make it at least to fight another day.
Okay. While we're still on this topic, another bill that was authored by Representative Rob Robertson, who, of course, chairs education in the House, would expand the charter school program to allow such schools to locate, I believe, in C districts. Right now, they're restricted to D or F districts, and so this would open up more districts for location creation of charter schools. What do you think about that one's chances in the Senate? And how do you feel about that legislation in general, I guess?
Well, I actually authored that bill myself last year, and
I remember that.
I've supported our charter schools for a good period of time. Again, it goes back into my principled belief that we've got to give more options to parents and let them make the best choices for their kids. But the C district expansion is kind of really necessary in light of COVID. How we held a lot of our schools harmless, and then the post-COVID test scores have not really gotten back to normal. So if you look at our D and F districts, there are only like 2 or 3 districts that are even D or Fs right now. So as we wait for those grades to stabilize, it's good for us to continue to expand that in more areas so that we don't, I guess, choke out the ability of charter schools to come into the state.
Yeah, makes sense. Not sure. Yeah, it does. I'm not sure there's quite the level of support in the Senate for that particular measure as there is in the House. But again, I think it makes sense to put it on the table and get the votes on the record. Hopefully it'll come out of committee, and we'll see how folks think about that writ large in the Senate. But we'll just have to wait and see how the process plays out.
Look, our process, I've seen this before, you've seen this before. 2 or 3 years ago, there was no chance the Senate had the votes to cut any taxes, and we had a $500 billion tax cut passed. Last year, for most of the session, there was no chance we were going to get rid of MAEP, and we ended up doing that. So, you know, as it goes through the process, votes somehow manage to get on board. So hopefully that'll happen with some of these pieces of legislation.
You're right. It's a great point. Speaking of which, what about HB 1? Sweeping tax reform legislation, which cleared the hurdle in the House, is now in the Senate. Of course, the Senate's got their own version. Give us your thoughts.
I wouldn't call it much of a hurdle in the House. We passed it with a pretty big margin.
That's true.
Every single Republican, and I think we even gained some Democrats.
I think that's right.
We support that legislation tremendously. It's been a priority of the House even before Speaker White's administration, just moving towards eliminating the income tax. I believe I was talking to Chairman Lamar the other day, and he and I both said, look, parts of our plan that are not perfect, that even we would like to see change potentially. But what we want to do is eliminate the state income tax. That is a priority of the House. It's a priority of the governor. And I think it's a priority for our people to do that. And I don't see us supporting any bill that raises 1 cent of any other tax if we are not eliminating the income tax fully without further legislative action. So I hope that this is just going to be like some of those other bills where the votes weren't there at first, but eventually they came on board. And I think that eliminating the state income tax will be good for our people and good for Mississippi's economy. And I think I have great confidence that our colleagues on the other end of the building will end up seeing that as well.
how would you respond to retired Mississippians who receive little or no benefit, and in some cases, depending on how they spend their disposable income, may even realize a slight tax increase when you consider the increase in the general sales tax and the increase in or the imposition of a new sales tax on fuel? What's your take on that, and how do you respond to that objection?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I still think we're going to, as this bill goes through the process, try to make that burden a little bit less. But the second thing I'll say is those taxes that they're paying, those are voluntary taxes. Those are taxes that they can adjust. They can make adjustments as to what they're doing and what they're spending money on as to paying or not paying those taxes. The income tax is an involuntary tax. Uncle Sam takes that out of my paycheck every week without asking me for permission, and I can't do anything about it. So I would say to those objections, look, why don't we move towards a fairer tax system where you get to control how much you're paying and not the government taking it out of your check involuntarily every week? And that's pretty much the only statement I could have to that. I mean, if we want to move to a consumption-based tax system and get away from the penalty tax that is the tax on work, I think you're going to see where people are going to have to make adjustments to their everyday lives to some extent to spread that out and pay that back into the coffers through the consumption tax.
I thought that in the state of Mississippi, it's somewhat difficult to cut taxes because we already have fairly low taxes, honestly, relatively speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and that's true even with respect to the income tax. The legislation that passed in 22 cut the income tax fairly significantly, and there's a lot of folks now whose income doesn't even make them eligible to pay, where they're not subjected to
That's
income
right.
tax. So at the low end of the scale, they may also see potentially some tax increases, like you say, depending on how they spend their disposable money and how they allocate that across those three categories.
That's right.
So
And people.
go ahead. Go ahead. You go,
No,
Jeff.
I was saying. I mean, there are a lot of people who intentionally don't pay taxes. I know we have. I mean, I always use the example of the drug dealer. The drug dealer in the community, they don't pay taxes. They get their money from underneath they hide their money underneath the mattress, and the government never sees it unless they get busted for drugs. So moving to that consumption-based system, even the drug dealer gets to pay their fair share of taxes, and we're not penalizing these people who are
I think you're
working
absolutely right.
legal
I
jobs.
think we,
So,
I think we have a huge so-called underground economy, cash economy, where there's no taxation being applied except when they buy something, when they consume something with it.
and-
They're certainly not paying income
exactly.
taxes, and many of them don't even have bank accounts. As you know, we have the least banked state in the country, and that's
right.
intentional to avoid any tracking by revenue sources that may say, hey, a lot of money's flowing through your account here, but you're not paying any taxes.
And I didn't realize that till I started practicing law and doing people's estates when they passed away. The number of clients I've had whose dead mama or daddies have had hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden away in some case or basket or Tupperware tub in the attic. It's crazy what people do with their money, but it's just for that reason. They don't want to pay taxes on money they've earned, and I don't necessarily blame them.
Yeah, and therefore they don't have bank accounts for fear that would just expose them and create a bit more of a footprint of their financial affairs, which is true than when you operate in a fully cash environment. And
That's
so increasing the consumption tax, the general sales tax, would in fact sort of pull some taxes from that income that's avoiding income tax is what's happening right now.
That's right. Unless they don't intend to ever buy anything again, they're going to be paying something.
So
or at
the
least anything
Senate
legally.
That's right. So I guess where we stand is the Senate says we're gonna reduce the income tax down to 2.99%. And do you think that's a non-starter in the House? You said something earlier that you felt like that even any tax increases that are not accompanied by full elimination is not something that you feel like your House colleagues would support.
Yeah, we're not going to support that. I could say that pretty confidently. We're not going to support raising the gas tax, excise tax, and not eliminating the income tax. So
Okay.
I'm confident
Got
to
it.
say that's not happening.
All right. Got it. Well, the Senate says the same about the House bill, so we'll see.
Well,
as
we'll
you
see.
say.
Maybe we'll meet in the middle somewhere.
That's right. Representative Jansen Owen has been our guest. We appreciate you coming on, Jansen. Really enjoyed it. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Gerard.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.